The streetlights had just flickered on when a young woman, shivering not from cold, stumbled from the payphone booth. She'd reported a car, doors agape, engine still running, parked in the lonely expanse of George Washington Park. Inside, on the passenger seat, a dark stain bloomed across the upholstery. A lot of blood, she'd whispered to the dispatcher, fear tightening her throat. Then the line went dead. The park stood silent, holding its breath. Twilight settled over Sharpsburg like a thick, gray blanket. Dale Miller guided his silver sedan down the familiar curve of the driveway, pulling it into the garage. The automatic door whirred, sealing him inside the concrete space. He cut the engine, and the sudden silence felt heavy. The house was quiet when he stepped inside. Susan wasn't home, just as he'd anticipated. A faint scent of old potpourri lingered in the air, a domestic detail that felt out of place with the hum in his head. He moved through the living room, past the framed photographs on the mantel, each smile a lie. His routine was a shell, a performance. He showered, the hot water beating against his skin, washing away nothing. He pulled on a fresh pair of jeans and a clean t-shirt. In the kitchen, he microwaved a container of leftover chicken and rice, the plastic lids swelling with steam. He ate quickly, standing over the counter, the bland flavors offering no comfort. He was killing time. That's what it felt like. Not living it. He sat at his desk, staring at the muted screen of his laptop. He had gone over the script in his mind countless times. Each step was precise, calculated. He knew what he needed to do. He understood the problem. His personal crisis, the one that had gnawed at him for months, had only been met with denial, a slow, festering wound ignored. Now a different kind of wound had opened. This was about consequence. This was about control. It was past midnight when he typed out the final email, a brief message to his boss, outlining a fabricated issue with a remote server, claiming he would be unreachable until morning. A digital breadcrumb, a small alibi laid carefully into the ether. He hit send. The screen glowed, then went dark. He left the house through the back door carrying a small duffel bag. The garage door, operated by a separate remote in his pocket, lowered silently behind him, swallowing the sedan in the suburban night into its metallic maw. He wasn't in the sedan. He was in a different vehicle, one that wouldn't draw attention. His nightly mission had begun. The first light of dawn was a pale wash across the eastern sky when the call came in. Not from Sharpsburg, but from a payphone a dozen miles away, near the edge of George Washington Park. The young woman's voice was thin, trembling. 911, what's your emergency? The dispatcher's voice was calm, practiced. There's a car, the caller stammered, in the park, off the main road near the old picnic area. She paused, a ragged breath escaping her. The doors are open, and there's a lot of blood. Can you describe the car, ma'am? Are you still at the scene? It's a silver sedan, she said, her voice barely a whisper. I saw it when I was walking. I didn't touch anything. Her voice rose, edged with panic. I don't want to wait for the police. I can't. You don't understand. Ma'am, it's important that you stay there so we can get more information, the dispatcher urged, but the line went dead. A dial tone buzzed, then silence. The dispatcher looked at the blinking light on her console, then at the clock. 6:15 a.m. Detective Jim Walsh arrived at the Miller residence just as the first rays of sun crested the roofline. The address had come from the silver sedan's registration. He pulled his unmarked car to the curb, the engine ticking as it cooled. Before he could step out, a beige minivan turned into the driveway, pulling up next to his vehicle. Susan Johnson, Dale Miller's wife, emerged from the minivan, a carry-on bag slung over her shoulder. She looked tired, her eyes a little red-rimmed from what was likely an early flight. She stopped short when she saw Walsh, a tall man in a dark suit standing by her house. Can I help you? She asked, a slight frown creasing her brow. Her voice held the quiet skepticism of someone who didn't expect trouble. Detective Walsh, Sharpsburg Police, he said, holding up his badge. I'm looking for Dale Miller. Susan blinked, a small, dismissive laugh escaping her lips. Dale, you must be mistaken. He's in Pittsburgh. Flew out yesterday morning. He left his car at the airport. She gestured vaguely down the street, as if Pittsburgh was just beyond the next corner. I just got back from seeing my sister. Early flight. Walsh held her gaze. Ma'am, we found a silver sedan matching your husband's registration earlier this morning. In George Washington Park, the VIN checks out. It's Dale's. The humor drained from Susan's face. Her eyes widened, a flicker of something close to alarm replacing her initial weariness. No, that's not right. He drove to the airport. That's where he always leaves it. Her hand went to her purse, fumbling for her phone. Okay, I'll call him. He'll tell you. She brought the phone to her ear, punching in numbers. The first ring, then the second. Suddenly, a faint, muffled vibration started in Walsh's jacket pocket. It was a subtle sound, but in the quiet morning air, it was distinct. He reached inside, pulling out a generic black flip phone. The screen displayed incoming call, Susan. Susan's jaw tightened. She stared at the phone in Walsh's hand, then at her own, still ringing. The color drained from her face, leaving a pale, stark canvas. How did you get Dale's cell phone? The question was a strained whisper, barely audible. Walsh lowered the phone, the ringing stopping abruptly. He looked at Susan, his expression unreadable, calm and factual. It was on the floor of his car, ma'am. We found it when we processed the scene. He paused, letting the words hang in the air. There's been a major crime, Mrs. Johnson. The words Detective Walsh spoke settled in Susan's chest like stones. Bullet hole. No victim found. She felt a tremor run through her, cold and sharp. The fact of Dale's phone in the detective's hand was a physical weight, heavier than the carry-on bag still slung over her shoulder. Her mind tried to make sense of major crime and bullet hole, but found no easy connection. The words hung in the crisp morning air. Bullet hole. No victim found. Susan felt a dull ache behind her eyes, the remnants of her long trip dissolving into something far more urgent. She stood on her own driveway, the morning sun now warm on her face, yet a cold dread had begun to settle deep in her gut. She swallowed, trying to clear her throat. His hotel, she said, her voice a little rougher than she intended. He always stays at the same place, the Grand Hyatt, downtown Pittsburgh. She rattled off the number, the digits feeling strangely heavy on her tongue. It was a reflex, a familiar detail that now felt like a desperate anchor in a rising tide of confusion. Walsh nodded, his expression remaining neutral, his gaze steady. He made a quick call on his own phone, speaking in low tones. Susan watched his face, searching for some clue, some hint of what he was hearing. The conversation was brief. When he hung up, he looked back at her. The hotel confirms Mr. Miller checked out yesterday afternoon, Walsh stated, his voice flat. Not this morning, ma'am. Yesterday. Susan felt a sudden hollowness. Yesterday. Dale had said he would be gone all weekend for the software seminars. He'd left early Wednesday morning. He always stays at the same place. The lie, unceremoniously exposed, twisted in her stomach. It contradicted everything he had told her, everything she had told the detective. The amount of blood in the car, Walsh continued, his voice calm, suggests a violent incident. Something significant occurred inside that vehicle. She winced, a mental image flashing, crimson staining the familiar gray upholstery. Her breath caught in her throat. She had to correct him, had to make him understand. He said seminars all weekend, Susan whispered, her voice cracking now, that he wouldn't be back until Sunday night. He lied to me. The admission tasted bitter, a betrayal she hadn't anticipated. Mrs. Johnson, can you tell me about Mr. Miller's demeanor before he left? Walsh asked, his eyes never leaving hers. Anything unusual? Was he distressed? Did he say anything out of the ordinary? Susan tried to replay the previous days. Dale had been quiet, yes, more quiet than usual, even for him. He'd spent a lot of time in his study, the door closed. She remembered him staring out the kitchen window one evening, his gaze distant, unfocused. She dismissed it then, attributing it to work stress, a heavy week. Now it felt like a silent prelude to something she couldn't comprehend. He was quiet, she said finally. Distracted, maybe. I thought he was just focused on work. Were there any issues between you two? Walsh pressed, his tone still even, but with an underlying probe. Arguments? Financial troubles? Anything that might cause him stress? Susan stiffened. The question felt like an intrusion, a judgment. She tightened her grip on her carry-on bag. No, she said, perhaps a little too quickly. We're fine, just normal married stuff. Everyday things, nothing out of the ordinary. She clung to the fading facade of normalcy. Even as she felt it crumble around her, the cracks were visible, not just in her voice, but in the tremor that started in her hands. Walsh studied her for another moment, then nodded slowly. Thank you for your time, Mrs. Johnson. We'll be in touch. He turned and walked back to his car. The crunch of his shoes on the gravel driveway was loud in the sudden silence. The engine hummed to life, and then his car pulled away. The quiet of the house, which had once been a comfort, now felt heavy, suffocating. It was filled with unspoken truths, with the mounting fear of what those truths might reveal. Susan pushed the minivan door closed, the click echoing too loudly. She walked inside, the air cool and stale, the scent of potpourri now smelling like a lie. Upstairs, she stood in the bedroom. The bed was neatly made, a habit she maintained even when traveling. She stared at Dale's side, the pillow untouched, the duvet smooth. The emptiness felt vast. Each lie he had told, each inconsistency Walsh had exposed, pressed down on her, in unbearable weight. She started to replay the last few weeks in her mind. Small details, dismissed at the time, now took on an ominous significance. The way he'd been so particular about his phone, never leaving it out of reach. The late nights in the study. She remembered finding a receipt once, tucked deep inside a book on his nightstand, a restaurant she didn't recognize, far from their usual places, and dated a night he claimed to be working late. She chalked it up to a business dinner, but the memory returned with a cold clarity and a phone call. She'd walked past the study door, slightly ajar, and heard his voice, hushed and urgent. He'd immediately closed the door when he saw her. He'd explained it as a sensitive work call. She had accepted it then. Now it felt like a secret, a deception. Her initial worry for Dale that he might be hurt slowly began to morph into something else, a bitter, burning sense of betrayal. Not just by the lies, but by the implication of what those lies meant. He had built this life with her, and now it felt like he had been dismantling it, piece by piece, without her knowing. She felt a hard knot forming in her stomach. She needed to know, not just for Detective Walsh, not just for the police, for herself. She needed to find out what truly happened. The forensics team worked methodically in the cool light of the police garage. Dale's silver sedan, now a crime scene, was being picked apart, piece by painstaking piece. It wasn't just blood they found. Tucked beneath the passenger seat, a small silver earring glinted. Entangled in the fibers of the seatbelt, a few strands of dark, unfamiliar hair. The case shifted, no longer just a missing person. It was an investigation into a potential homicide or abduction, and Dale Miller was now either the victim or the prime suspect. The findings from Dale's car reached Detective Walsh's desk by late afternoon. The blood was human, significant enough to indicate a serious injury, but it was the other items that spoke volumes. A small silver hoop earring, intricately designed in several long strands of dark hair, clearly not Susan's blonde. The case was no longer just about a missing man. It had twisted into something darker, a possible homicide or abduction, with Dale Miller either the victim or a very prime suspect. Walsh spent the rest of the day in his office, poring over Dale's financial records. The regular statements painted a picture of a stable, middle-class life, but then a second set of records surfaced. Unexplained cash withdrawals from ATMs, often late at night, and a credit card linked to a different bank, one Susan clearly knew nothing about. The spending on it was modest but consistent. Restaurant bills for two, small gifts, gas station charges from areas outside Sharpsburg. Later that evening, as Susan sat numbly on her sofa, the house feeling vast and empty, her phone buzzed. It was an unfamiliar number. The text message read, "Dale's secrets will hurt you more than you know. Be careful." No name. Just that cryptic warning, hanging in the air like a threat. A cold wave of fear and indignation washed over her. Dale's secrets. Plural. The next morning, while walking her dog, she ran into Mrs. Henderson, their elderly neighbor, tending her petunias. Mrs. Henderson paused, wiping her hands on her apron. "Poor dear, I heard about Dale." Awful, just awful. He always seemed such a polite man, though I did see him with a different woman at the coffee shop a few weeks back. Didn't look like you, dear. I thought nothing of it at the time, of course. Just a colleague, I supposed. Susan's stomach lurched. A different woman. The casual observation, meant as neighborly gossip, landed like a physical blow. It clicked with the anonymous text, with the secret credit card. The perfect Midwestern life, the stable marriage she'd believed in, was unraveling at a speed she couldn't comprehend. She called Walsh, her voice tight with a mixture of anger and a morbid, terrible curiosity. I received a text, she said, relaying the message. And Mrs. Henderson saw Dale with another woman. Walsh listened, his tone neutral as ever. Mrs. Johnson, there are things we found in Mr. Miller's car. He paused and Susan braced herself. A woman's earring and some hair that isn't yours. The words hit her like a physical force. He couldn't. The denial clawed at her throat, but it was weak, flimsy. The perfect image of Dale, the dutiful husband, the reliable man, shattered into 1,000 pieces. She felt a sob catch in her chest, hot tears blurring her vision. It wasn't just a lie about a trip. It was a complete, deliberate deception, a betrayal. She sank onto the kitchen chair, the cool linoleum a stark contrast to the burning in her eyes. He wouldn't, she whispered, her voice raw. He couldn't do this. But even as she said it, the memories flooded back. His increased travel for business trips, the vague explanations for late nights, the way he'd been so protective of his phone. She had dismissed them, all of them, opportunities. That's what they were, opportunities for a double life. Did Mr. Miller have any friends, any associates that you weren't particularly close with? Walsh asked, his voice cutting through her grief. Someone he might have kept separate from your social circle? Susan racked her brain, the fragments of their shared life now looking alien. Then a name surfaced. There was Jenny, she said hesitantly, a new coworker. He mentioned her a few times, said she was just a colleague, new to the team. The words felt hollow as she spoke them. Walsh noted the name. His team, meanwhile, had already been tracking the transactions on the secret credit card. Small purchases, consistent, leading to a specific address in a neighboring town, a quiet apartment complex a good 45 minutes from Sharpsburg. It wasn't fancy, just a modest place, tucked away. They obtained a warrant. Inside, the apartment felt lived in, not just a temporary hideout. There were clothes in the closet, men's and women's, toiletries in the bathroom, bills addressed to J. Miller, Dale Miller's name, but with a different initial. On a small bookshelf, nestled between paperbacks, a photograph lay face down. When an officer picked it up, it fell open. It was a candid shot, a bright, casual moment. Dale, smiling broadly, his arm around a woman Susan had never seen before. She had warm, dark hair, and her eyes crinkled at the corners when she smiled. A woman clearly not Susan. The name Jenny echoed in the detective's mind. The woman in the photo was Jenny. The news of Dale's disappearance, coupled with the hushed whispers of a different woman in a secret apartment, spread through Sharpsburg like a brush fire. At the grocery store, Susan felt the weight of every sidelong glance, every abruptly silenced conversation as she pushed her cart down the aisles. The polite smiles of acquaintances felt strained, their pity a thin veil over their morbid curiosity. This was her new reality, humiliating and inescapable. The whispers started subtly, then grew louder, a persistent hum beneath the surface of daily life in Sharpsburg. Dale Miller's disappearance, the bloody car, and the revelation of a second life in a modest apartment had become the town's most sensational story. Susan felt it everywhere. At the grocery store, she could feel the weight of eyes on her, the hushed conversations abruptly ceasing as she passed. Neighbors, once friendly, now offered strained, pitying smiles, their expressions betraying a morbid curiosity. Her humiliation was a new skin she wore, thin and exposed. Meanwhile, Jenny, the woman from the photograph, initially proved evasive. Her apartment had been empty when the police arrived. It took Walsh's team several hours to track her down at her workplace, a small accounting firm on the edge of town. She was brought into the precinct, a nervous energy radiating from her. In the interrogation room, under Walsh's calm, persistent questioning, Jenny eventually broke. She confessed to a long-standing affair with Dale, a relationship that had begun almost 2 years ago. Her voice was soft, laced with a mix of regret and a lingering affection. "He was so charming," she said, wringing her hands. "So attentive. He said he loved me. Said you two were just roommates." She painted a picture of Dale that Susan wouldn't recognize. A charismatic yet deeply troubled man. Jenny revealed that Dale was drowning in debt, not just the secret credit card, which was primarily for their shared expenses, but far more serious, hidden gambling debts. "He owed a lot of money to some bad people," Jenny whispered, her eyes wide with fear. "He told me they were threatening him, threatening both of us." She described a recent argument just days before Dale vanished. It had been intense. Dale had been frantic, pacing the apartment. He'd hinted at a desperate plan, a way to fix everything, to make all their problems disappear. "He said it was the only way out," Jenny recalled, a shiver running through her. "That it would give us a fresh start, far away from all of this." Back home, Susan sat at her kitchen table, the silence in the house amplifying Jenny's words. Gambling debts, threatening him, a desperate plan, a bitter contempt began to curdle in her stomach. The man she had married, the one she had lived with for 20 years, was a complete stranger. She pulled out old financial statements, the ones Dale had always managed, always kept in order. Her hands trembled as she started to sift through them, month by month, year by year. Discrepancies jumped out at her. Large, irregular withdrawals from their joint checking account that Dale had attributed to investment opportunities or tax planning. Hidden accounts she'd never known about, small at first, then growing. Alarming patterns of spending, not just on the secret card, but on his primary ones too, disguised amidst legitimate business expenses. Then she found it. Tucked away in a folder labeled Property Deeds was a life insurance policy. It had been taken out just a few months ago. A substantial sum, more than she could have imagined. She was the sole beneficiary, her name bold and clear. The discovery sent a cold wave through her. If Dale was a victim, this policy would provide for her. But coupled with Jenny's story of debt, desperate plans, and threats, it darkened the possibility. It strengthened another, far more insidious idea, a staged disappearance, or worse, a fake death. Dale's death would solve all his financial problems, leaving her well off and him free to vanish. Detective Walsh, hearing about the insurance policy, felt the same shift. The narrative was becoming clearer. "Insurance fraud," he murmured to his sergeant. "He could be faking his own death." Susan stared at the policy document, the sum printed in bold letters. Her heart was broken, but a steely resolve was growing within her. She had been in denial, she realized, denying the distance, the secrets, the strange quietness. "He was always so careful," she whispered to herself, remembering the meticulous way he managed their budget, his almost obsessive need for order. It was a lie. He was careful, yes, but not in the way she'd thought. He was careful in his deception. She remembered a conversation from months ago, one she had brushed off as him being stressed. He talked about feeling trapped, about the endless grind. "I just want a fresh start, Susan," he'd said, his eyes distant. She thought he meant a new project, a vacation. Now the words carried a chilling new meaning. Walsh's team, meanwhile, had been reviewing CCTV footage from businesses and traffic cameras around George Washington Park. Near the entrance, a grainy image from a convenience store camera surfaced. It showed Dale's silver sedan, abandoned. And then, a figure, undeniably Dale, getting out of his own car and quickly getting into a different vehicle, a dark, nondescript sedan that had been waiting nearby. The timestamp was early morning, just hours before the 911 call. The plot thickened, congealed into something ugly and undeniable. Dale wasn't alone, and he wasn't the victim of the crime reported in his car. He was the architect. The grainy CCTV footage, once a frustrating puzzle, now pointed a clear direction. The dark sedan Dale entered wasn't a random vehicle. Further analysis of traffic cameras on the route out of Sharpsburg led Detective Walsh's team to a rusty, late-model pickup truck, its license plate eventually traced. The truck was registered to a Clint Olson, an old high school acquaintance of Dale's, a name that faintly tugged at Susan's memory from years past. The grainy CCTV footage, once a frustrating puzzle, now pointed a clear direction. The dark sedan Dale entered wasn't a random vehicle. Further analysis of traffic cameras on the route out of Sharpsburg led Detective Walsh's team to a rusty, late-model pickup truck, its license plate eventually traced. The truck was registered to a Clint Olson, an old high school acquaintance of Dale's, a name that faintly tugged at Susan's memory from years past. A quick check on Clint Olson revealed a familiar pattern. A history of petty fraud, mostly bounce checks and minor scams, and a consistent record of financial struggles, a string of unpaid bills and repossessed vehicles. He was the kind of man who always looked for the easy way out, the quick score. The pieces began to click into place for Walsh. Walsh's team picked Clint up early the next morning. He was brought into the interrogation room, a man in his late 40s with tired eyes and a perpetually worried frown. Clint initially denied everything, his voice a low grumble. "Don't know what you're talking about, detective. Haven't seen Dale in months, not since that fishing trip last summer." Susan, when informed of Clint's involvement by Walsh, felt a jolt of recognition. "Clint Olson," she murmured, the name finally settling. "Dale used to go on fishing trips with him. I never really paid much mind to it. Always seemed like a bit of a shifty character, if you ask me." Walsh returned to Clint, this time carrying a tablet. He set it on the table, turning the screen to face Clint. The convenience store footage played, silent and damning. Clint Olson's pickup truck pulling up, Dale Miller getting in, then driving away. Clint's face, etched with a forced bravado, slowly crumpled. He leaned back in his chair, running a hand over his thinning hair. "Right, all right," he sighed, the fight gone from him. "He put me up to it." Clint Olson then confessed to his part in Dale's elaborate scheme. Dale, he explained, had orchestrated the entire disappearance to look like a violent crime. The bullet hole, the blood, all staged. The blood, Clint admitted, was pig's blood, bought from a local butcher shop, painstakingly splashed and smeared to create the illusion of a struggle, a tragedy. The goal was to trigger the life insurance policy, to make it look like Dale had been murdered or abducted, leaving Susan with a massive payout. "He said he was going to Mexico," Clint revealed, his voice barely above a whisper. "With Jenny, said he'd meet her there once the money came through. A whole new life." Clint admitted he had dropped Dale off at a bus station in Columbus, an hour after the park abandonment, where Dale had a pre-purchased ticket for a long-haul journey south. "He never meant to hurt Susan," Clint insisted, looking directly at Walsh, as if pleading for understanding. "Just to get out from under all that debt. He said you'd be set for life, Mrs. Johnson." Walsh called Jenny back in. She listened to Clint's confession with growing horror, her face paling as she realized the full extent of Dale's deception. She had believed they were escaping together, building a new life. She hadn't known about the staged crime, the fake death, the insurance fraud. "He told me he was just going to leave, start fresh," she stammered, tears welling in her eyes. "He said he'd figure out how to get money later. Not like this." The betrayal was profound. Feeling used and discarded, Jenny cooperated fully, providing details of Dale's planned escape route, the cities he intended to pass through, the vague timeline he had given her. Susan received the news from Walsh with a strange mix of emotions. Dale hadn't been murdered. He hadn't been abducted. He had simply planned to abandon her, to fake his own death for money, leaving her with a payout while he started a new life with another woman. The initial rush of relief that he wasn't dead was fleeting, quickly replaced by a profound, searing humiliation and a deep, burning anger. He wanted to leave her with a payout, not because he loved her, but as a transaction. The Sharpsburg Police Department officially issued an arrest warrant for Dale Miller, for insurance fraud, for conspiracy, for faking his own death. The story was far from over. Now, as the truth about Dale's carefully constructed deceit comes crashing down, one can't help but wonder about the ripple effects of such choices. Stick around to the end to see how life's costly choices unfold. The headline screamed, "Local man fakes own death for insurance scam, lover involved." The Sharpsburg Gazette had splashed the story across its front page, a lurid tale of deceit and betrayal. For Susan, her private pain had been dragged into the merciless glare of public scrutiny. Every trip to the mailbox, every glance out the window felt like an invasion. Her neighbors, once a source of comfort, now represented the collective gaze of pity and judgment. The headline screamed, "Local man fakes own death for insurance scam, lover involved." The Sharpsburg Gazette had splashed the story across its front page, a lurid tale of deceit and betrayal. For Susan, her private pain had been dragged into the merciless glare of public scrutiny. Every trip to the mailbox, every glance out the window, felt like an invasion. Her neighbors, once a source of comfort, now represented the collective gaze of pity and judgment. She imagined their whispers over fences, their clucking tongues in grocery store aisles. Susan found herself retreating, the solitude of her home becoming both a refuge and a prison. The phone rang constantly with well-meaning but invasive calls from friends, their concern thinly veiled curiosity. She let the answering machine pick up, listening to the strained voices, offering condolences that felt like accusations. She couldn't face them, couldn't explain what she herself barely understood. Her financial stability, once a given, now felt like a house built on sand. She consulted with a lawyer about the life insurance policy. The meeting was brief, the news grim. Due to the fraud, the policy was likely null and void. There would be no payout. The lawyer spoke in careful, professional tones, but the message was clear. Her future, once secure within the framework of Dale's presumed death, was now precarious. The debts Dale had accumulated, the hidden accounts, they were still there, still real. The ripples of Dale's actions spread. Jenny faced charges for her role in the insurance fraud, her reputation in her small accounting firm irrevocably ruined. Clint Olson, his history of petty crime now escalating to federal fraud and conspiracy, was also facing significant time. Lives casually intertwined with Dale's deceit were being dismantled. Dale's parents, bewildered and heartbroken, reached out to Susan. Their calls were a mix of genuine support and difficult questions. "Did you know, Susan?" his mother asked, her voice cracking over the phone. "How could Dale do such a thing?" Susan offered what little she could, explanations that felt hollow even to her own ears. She didn't know. Not really. To cope, Susan tentatively started attending a local support group. She sat among strangers, sharing fragments of her story, listening to others' tales of betrayal and loss. The emotions were a tangled mess within her. A faint, almost shameful relief that Dale was alive, a burning, bitter anger at his profound betrayal, and a deep, mortifying shame over her own naivete. How could she have been so blind? She began to systematically purge Dale from her life. She started with his study, packing up his books, his neatly arranged files, his framed certificates. She put them in boxes, then hauled them to the curb for the next bulk trash pickup. She sold his old golf clubs at a yard sale, the worn leather bag, a symbol of weekends he had spent doing God knows what. It was a symbolic act, a quiet severing. A few days later, a letter arrived. The postmark was from a city in Arizona, dated several days before Dale's attempted border crossing. It was from Dale. His handwriting, once so familiar, now looked alien. She opened it with trembling fingers. The words were shallow, regretful, a plea for understanding. He spoke of being trapped, of wanting a new life, of how sorry he was for the pain he'd caused, but that it was for the best, really. It was self-serving, devoid of genuine remorse. Susan didn't finish reading it. She took the letter, crumpled it in her fist, and walked to the backyard. She found the old metal trash can they used for yard waste, lit a match, and dropped the letter inside. The paper curled, then blackened, the flame consuming his empty words, his pathetic justifications. She watched it burn until nothing but ash remained, refusing to acknowledge his attempts at reconciliation. The phone rang again. It was Detective Walsh. His voice was calm, factual. "Mrs. Johnson, we've apprehended Dale Miller." He explained that Dale had been caught attempting to cross the border into Mexico, apprehended by Border Patrol thanks to the warrant. There was no sense of triumph for Susan, no jubilant relief, only a quiet, weary resignation. He was caught, the legal process would begin. But the damage had been done. The weight of his betrayal still settled heavily in her chest, a permanent scar. Yet, as she stared at the smoking remnants of his letter, a tiny, fragile flicker of resolve ignited within her. This wasn't the end of her story. It was just the beginning of a different one. With Dale apprehended, the relentless machinery of the legal system began to grind. Every sordid detail of his affair, his gambling debts, his elaborate fraud, was systematically laid bare in the antiseptic environment of the courtroom. Susan sat in the gallery, a silent observer of the wreckage of her life, watching as the man she married was stripped of every pretense. With Dale apprehended, the relentless machinery of the legal system began to grind. Every sordid detail of his affair, his gambling debts, his elaborate fraud, was systematically laid bare in the antiseptic environment of the courtroom. Susan sat in the gallery, a silent observer of the wreckage of her life, watching as the man she married was stripped of every pretense. Then came her turn. She was called to testify, a painful public recounting of her husband's deception. She spoke in a clear, steady voice, relaying the facts as Detective Walsh had uncovered them, each word a fresh cut. The secret apartment, the fake trip to Pittsburgh, the pig's blood, the insurance policy. The courtroom was silent, absorbing her testimony. During cross-examination, Dale's defense lawyer, a sharp, unsmiling woman, tried to discredit Susan. Her questions were pointed, designed to imply complicity, to muddy the waters of Susan's innocence. "Isn't it true, Mrs. Johnson," the lawyer began, her voice smooth but edged, "that your marriage was already failing? That you and Mr. Miller had grown apart?" Susan's breath hitched. The question, intended to cast doubt on Dale's sole culpability, struck a nerve. It wasn't a lie. She remembered her own moments of resentment, the quiet frustrations that had built up over the years, the unspoken distance that had settled between them like dust. And then, a memory, one she had buried deep, a small indiscretion, born of loneliness and neglect. Months ago, at a work conference in Milwaukee, a brief, almost innocent flirtation with a colleague named Robert. He was kind, attentive, his laughter easy. They'd shared a long dinner, a few too many glasses of wine. Nothing happened, not physically, but there had been lingering gazes. A hand held a moment too long. She deleted the messages later, rationalizing it as protecting Dale, but in truth, it was protecting herself. She'd hidden that one lunch outing, a small, inconsequential lie, but a lie nonetheless. The pressure of the trial, the lawyer's probing questions, forced Susan to examine her own conscience. Her own complicity, not in Dale's fraud, but in the slow decay of their marriage. She hadn't been an entirely innocent victim in the grand scheme of their relationship, only in his criminal one. The thought was unsettling, uncomfortable. Detective Walsh, watching Susan on the stand, observed the flicker of emotion in her eyes, the brief hesitation before she answered. He sensed a new layer of hidden pain, a quiet complexity beneath her anger. For a fleeting moment, he wondered if Susan's innocence was as complete as it seemed, a momentary doubt that passed as quickly as it came. His job was about the facts of the crime, not the nuances of a failing marriage. Susan's testimony, despite her inner turmoil, was compelling, direct. It cemented Dale's guilt. The jury returned a verdict of guilty on all counts: insurance fraud, conspiracy, and other related charges. Dale was sentenced to a significant term in federal prison. And as the judge's gavel struck, Susan felt a strange sense of hollowness, not vindication. The legal system had done its job. Justice, in a cold, procedural way, had been served. But it didn't fill the emptiness left by 2 decades of shared life. She walked out of the courthouse, the media scrum a blur of flashing lights and shouted questions she ignored. Her public image as the wronged wife was only part of her truth, she realized. A convenient narrative for the world, but not the whole picture of Susan Johnson. Back home, while packing some final boxes of Dale's things, she stumbled upon a long-forgotten box of old letters tucked away in the back of his closet. Letters from years ago, written by Dale to a college friend, detailing his increasing despair over financial issues, the pressures of providing, the feeling of being caught. She had never seen them before, never known. She had been so focused on maintaining stability, on the outward appearance of their success, that she had ignored his quiet pleas, his unspoken struggles, prioritizing a superficial peace over genuine intimacy. The realization was a bitter pill. The trial was over, Dale was in prison, Susan was free in a way, but the freedom felt like a vast, empty space. She was left with a strange mix of relief and a profound emptiness, a new understanding of the man she married, and a clearer, more unsettling understanding of herself. The judge's voice was firm, resonating through the courtroom as he delivered Dale's sentence. He spoke of the destructive nature of deceit, the corrosive power of greed, and the profound impact Dale's actions had on his family and community. Dale stood impassively, his face a mask, absorbing the years he would spend behind bars. Justice, in this final formal act, was served. The judge's voice was firm, resonating through the courtroom as he delivered Dale's sentence. He spoke of the destructive nature of deceit, the corrosive power of greed, and the profound impact Dale's actions had on his family and community. Dale stood impassively, his face a mask, absorbing the years he would spend behind bars. Justice, in this final formal act, was served. Jenny and Clint also received their sentences, less severe than Dale's, but still life-altering, irrevocably altering the course of their lives. The community, having followed the sensational case with morbid fascination, slowly began to move on. New scandals, new headlines would eventually replace Dale Miller's story. But the stain on the Miller/Johnson name remained, a permanent mark on Susan's life in Sharpsburg. Susan, however, was determined not to remain tethered to the wreckage. She started therapy, a quiet, weekly session dedicated to untangling the knots of her identity. She was no longer just Dale's wife, nor solely the betrayed woman. She needed to figure out who Susan Johnson was, on her own terms. She began volunteering at a local animal shelter, finding a surprising solace in the simple, uncomplicated needs of the stray dogs and cats. It was a small step, a tangible act of kindness that helped her feel productive, useful, a quiet step towards rebuilding her own moral compass. The house, their once beloved home, had become a mausoleum of broken promises. Every room held a memory, now tainted. Every object, a reminder of a life built on a foundation of lies. She found herself walking through the familiar spaces, feeling like a ghost. She knew with a certainty that settled deep in her bones that she couldn't stay. She decided to sell the house, a terrifying but necessary step towards a fresh start. Her lawyer called her again. The insurance company, as expected, was pursuing a civil suit to recover the costs of their investigation from Dale, and, the lawyer cautioned, they might also attempt to implicate Susan, arguing she should have known or even benefited despite her testimony. The legal battles were far from over. Susan understood then that the pay the price theme wasn't just for Dale. It was a long, arduous process for everyone involved, a payment exacted not just by the courts, but by life itself. She began to grapple with the complex notion of forgiveness, not for Dale, not yet, but for herself, for the illusions she had clung to, for the truth she had avoided, for the moments she had let the distance between them grow unchecked. It was a slow, painful process, a difficult self-reckoning. One afternoon in the produce aisle of the local grocery store, she had a chance encounter with Detective Walsh. He was selecting apples, his back to her. He turned, saw her, and offered a quiet, respectful nod. There were no words exchanged, no need for them, just a shared understanding of the complexities of human nature, of the depths of deception, and the resilience required to navigate its aftermath. Then a final bitter letter arrived from Dale, postmarked from prison. It was filled with venom, blaming her for his capture, for testifying, for everything. He showed no remorse, no flicker of understanding of his own actions, only self-pity and anger directed outwards. This letter, rather than reigniting her fury, brought a strange, quiet peace. It was the final severing. The anger, which had been a heavy cloak, finally fell away. There was nothing left to hold on to. Susan found a renewed sense of purpose, not in revenge or in dwelling on the past, but in quiet resilience. The true cost of the affair and the betrayal wasn't just legal fees or prison sentences. It was emotional, a tearing of trust. It was moral, a chipping away at decency. And it was deeply personal, redefining who she was, forcing her to confront the woman in the mirror and decide what kind of future she wanted to build, now that the rubble had settled. Months later, Susan packed the last box in the empty house. its quiet rooms echoing with a past that was finally fading. She paused at the front door, taking one final look at the familiar street, the quiet Midwestern neighborhood bathed in the soft afternoon light. A moving van pulled up across the street. A young family emerged, full of hopes and dreams, blissfully unaware of the silent dramas that had unfolded within the walls they were soon to call home. Susan moved into a smaller apartment on the other side of town. She embraced the simplicity, the uncluttered space, the quiet routine of a life built on her own terms. She cautiously rekindled old friendships, forming new connections, no longer defined by the scandal that had consumed her. A small job at the local library offered a new sense of purpose, a quiet rhythm to her days. She reflected on the journey, the shock, the anger, the shame, the slow, painful process of healing. The idea of love and trust still felt distant, like a faint melody, but no longer entirely impossible. She visited her parents more often now, sharing moments of vulnerability, the lessons learned from the hard ground of her experience. She understood that morality wasn't about avoiding mistakes, but about how one responded to them. The sting of betrayal still existed, a scar, but it no longer defined her. Occasionally, she'd see Clint Olson's family at the grocery store, a silent acknowledgement passing between them, a shared understanding of the collateral damage. There was a quiet strength in her eyes now, the look of a woman who had endured and was slowly, steadily rebuilding. The Midwestern landscape, once a backdrop for her unraveling, now offered a serene horizon. Susan, having paid her own emotional price, looked forward to a future, however uncertain, built on her own terms.